I was sitting in my home office in Phoenix, Arizona, reviewing some contracts when my phone buzzed with a text from my 14-year-old son Jake. The message made my blood run cold. "Dad, someone is trying to arrest me, help." My fingers were already dialing his number before I could process the full weight of those words, but the call went straight to voicemail. I grabbed my keys and sprinted to my car, my heart hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape my chest. The subdivision where we lived, Saguaro Heights, had always been a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of Phoenix. When my wife passed away 3 years ago, I had moved here with Jake to start fresh, away from the memories that haunted our old place in Temp. The HOA had seemed reasonable enough during the buying process, just your typical rules about lawn maintenance and exterior paint colors. I should have known better. Nothing involving a homeowners association stays reasonable for long. I called Jake's number 4 more times during the 7-minute drive home, each attempt going to voicemail. My mind raced through worst-case scenarios. Had he gotten in trouble at school? Was this about the incident last month when he and his friends were riding their bikes through the neighborhood after dark? The HOA president, a woman named Patricia Dennison, had sent me a strongly worded letter about that, claiming they were disturbing the peace and loitering with suspicious intent. They were 14-year-old kids riding bikes, but Patricia had a way of turning everything into a federal crime. When I turned onto Mesquite Drive, I saw a cluster of people gathered near the community pool area. My stomach dropped. I recognized Jake's blue backpack on the ground, his phone lying a few feet away with the screen cracked. 2 men wearing black polo shirts with Saguaro Heights security embroidered on them had my son's arms pinned behind his back. Jake's face was red, tears streaming down his cheeks, and he was struggling against their grip. I slammed on my brakes and jumped out of the car, leaving the door open and the engine running. "Get your hands off my son right now," the larger of the 2 men, a guy who looked like he spent more time at the gym than was healthy, turned to face me. His name tag read Derek. "Sir, you need to calm down. This individual was caught trespassing on HOA property and refused to comply with our lawful orders. That's my son, and this is our neighborhood. He lives here. Let him go immediately." I moved toward them, but the second security guard, a wiry man whose tag said Marcus, stepped between us. "Sir, if you interfere with official HOA security business, we'll be forced to detain you as well," Marcus said, his hand moving to his belt where he had zip ties hanging like he was some kind of actual law enforcement officer. Patricia Dennison emerged from behind the security guards, her arms crossed over her chest. She was wearing her usual outfit, a cream-colored blazer over a floral blouse, her blonde hair sprayed into an immovable helmet. At 53 years old, she had been HOA president for the past 6 years, and she treated the position like she was running a small authoritarian nation. "Logan, your son was swimming in the community pool after hours. The rules clearly state that pool access ends at 8 p.m. on weekdays. It's 8:45. He's in violation of Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA Covenant," Patricia said, pulling out a printed copy of the HOA rules like she was a prosecutor presenting evidence. "So you're having him arrested. He's 14 years old. He was swimming in the neighborhood pool. Are you insane?" I could feel my voice rising, but I didn't care. Jake was openly sobbing now, still held in place by Derek's meaty hands. He refused to leave when instructed and became verbally combative with our security personnel. Patricia continued, her voice calm and measured, like she was explaining something to a small child. "We have zero tolerance for disrespect toward HOA authority figures. We're simply detaining him until his parent or guardian can be located to discuss the violation and arrange appropriate consequences. I'm right here. Now let him go, or I'm calling the police. I pulled out my phone, but Marcus moved closer, his posture threatening. The HOA has the legal authority to enforce community standards and maintain order within the subdivision. If you call the police, you'll be wasting their time. This is a civil matter under HOA jurisdiction, Marcus said, and I noticed he had his hand on what looked like a canister of pepper spray. That was when I realized these people actually believed they had the authority to arrest residents. They weren't real police officers. They weren't even real security guards as far as I could tell. Patricia had hired them 6 months ago, and they drove around the neighborhood in a white SUV with security printed on the side. But I had never seen any indication they had actual legal authority to do anything beyond reporting violations. You don't have any legal authority to detain anyone. You're not police officers. Let my son go right now, or I will call real cops and have you arrested for kidnapping. I started dialing 911, but Derek suddenly released Jake and lunged toward me, grabbing for my phone. Dad. Jake screamed, and that sound, the pure terror in my son's voice, triggered something primal in me. I sidestepped Derek's grab and shoved him hard in the chest. He stumbled backward, more surprised than hurt, and I moved to Jake, putting myself between my son and these lunatics. Jake, get in the car. Now. I didn't take my eyes off the 3 people in front of me as I heard Jake scramble to his feet and run toward my still-running vehicle. Logan Garrison, you just assaulted an HOA security officer. That's a $1,500 fine and grounds for a lien on your property, Patricia said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She pulled out her phone and started recording. Call whoever you want. I'm calling the actual police. I backed toward my car, keeping them in sight, and completed the call to emergency services. The dispatcher answered immediately. 911, what's your emergency? I'm at the Saguaro Heights subdivision on Mesquite Drive. 2 men claiming to be HOA security just tried to arrest my 14-year-old son for swimming in the neighborhood pool after hours. They physically detained him against his will. I need officers here immediately. Are you or your son injured, sir? My son is shaken up, but we're okay. These people are still here, and I'm concerned they're going to try to detain us again. They're claiming they have authority to arrest residents. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Are the individuals armed? I looked at Derek and Marcus more carefully. They have what looks like pepper spray and zip ties. I don't see any firearms. All right, sir. Officers will be there in approximately 4 minutes. Please maintain distance from these individuals and don't engage with them further. Patricia's expression had shifted from righteous indignation to something resembling concern. She stepped closer to her security guards and said something to them I couldn't hear. Derek and Marcus exchanged glances, and for a moment I thought they might try to leave, but Patricia shook her head firmly. I stayed on the line with the dispatcher, standing next to my car where Jake was locked inside, his face pressed against the window. He looked terrified, and I wanted nothing more than to drive away and take him somewhere safe, but I knew we needed to wait for the police. If I left, Patricia would spin this into some story where I was the aggressor, where Jake had done something terrible, and her rent-a-cops were just doing their jobs. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the commotion. I recognized several of them. There was Margaret Chen from 2 houses down, a retired teacher who had always been kind to Jake. Standing next to her was Bob Whitmore, a guy who worked from home and spent most of his time complaining about everyone else's lawns. A few other faces I recognized, but couldn't name, watched with varying expressions of concern and curiosity. The 4 minutes felt like 40, but eventually, I heard sirens approaching. 2 Phoenix PD patrol cars pulled into the subdivision, their lights painting the gathering dusk in shades of red and blue. 4 officers emerged, 2 from each vehicle, and approached with that careful wariness that cops have when they're walking into an unknown situation. The first officer to reach us was a tall woman with her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her name tag read Officer J. Martinez. "Who called 911? I did. I raised my hand slightly, still holding my phone. "I'm Logan Garrison. That's my son Jake in my car." Those 2 men in the black shirts physically detained him against his will because he was swimming in our community pool after the posted hours. They claimed they had authority to arrest him. Officer Martinez looked at Derek and Marcus, then at Patricia. "Who are you 3? Patricia stepped forward, her phone still in her hand, though she had stopped recording. "I'm Patricia Dennison, president of the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association. These are our contracted security personnel, Derek Simmons and Marcus Webb. We were enforcing HOA covenants when this man became violent and assaulted Derek." "That's not what happened," I said, my voice tight with anger. "They had my son's arms pinned behind his back. He was crying and afraid. When I tried to call the police, that one lunged at me to grab my phone, and I pushed him away to protect myself." The second officer, a younger man with red hair whose tag identified him as Officer T. Reynolds, approached Derek and Marcus. "Do you 2 have any law enforcement credentials?" Derek shifted his weight uncomfortably. "We're private security contracted by the HOA. "That's not what I asked. Do you have law enforcement credentials? Are you licensed security guards in the state of Arizona?" Marcus and Derek exchanged glances. Marcus cleared his throat. "We're HOA security. We have authority granted by the Homeowners Association to enforce community rules and maintain order." "So that's a no," Officer Reynolds said. "Did you physically detain the minor child in that vehicle?" "He was in violation of HOA rules and refused to comply with our lawful instructions," Derek said, his tone defensive. "We used reasonable force to detain him until his parent could be located." Officer Martinez walked over to my car and tapped on the window. I unlocked the doors and she leaned down to speak to Jake. "Hey there, I'm Officer Martinez. Are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere?" Jake shook his head, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. His voice was small when he spoke. "They grabbed me and wouldn't let me go. I was trying to get my phone to call my dad, and they said if I didn't stop resisting, they'd use pepper spray on me." I felt rage surge through me again. "They threatened to pepper spray my son." Officer Martinez held up a hand. "Sir, let me get all the information first." "Jake, did they hurt you when they grabbed you?" "My shoulder hurts a little. The big guy twisted my arm behind my back." Jake rolled his shoulder, wincing slightly. "Okay, just sit tight for a minute." Officer Martinez straightened up and walked back to her fellow officers. She conferred with them in low voices while Patricia, Derek, and Marcus stood in an uncomfortable cluster. A third police car pulled up, and a sergeant emerged. He was an older man with gray hair and the weathered look of someone who had seen everything at least twice. His name tag read SGT. "Holbrook?" Officer Martinez brought him up to speed quickly, and I watched his expression darken as she spoke. Sergeant Holbrook approached Derek and Marcus with Officer Reynolds at his side. "Gentlemen, I need you to place your hands behind your backs." Derek's face went pale. "What? Why?" "We didn't do anything wrong. You physically detained a minor without legal authority. That's unlawful imprisonment and potentially kidnapping under Arizona law. You have the right to remain silent." Sergeant Holbrook continued reading them their Miranda rights as Officer Reynolds moved behind them with handcuffs. "This is outrageous." Patricia's voice cut through the evening air. "They were acting under my authority as HOA president. If anyone should be arrested, it's Logan for assault." Sergeant Holbrook turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Madam, homeowners associations have no legal authority to detain residents or their children. These men committed a crime. As for the assault allegation, from what I understand, Mr. Garrison pushed one of these men away when they lunged at him while he was calling 911. That's self-defense, not assault. This is absurd. I'm calling our HOA attorney right now." Patricia stabbed at her phone screen, her face flushed with anger. "You're welcome to do that, madam," Sergeant Holbrook said calmly. "Officer Martinez, take statements from the victim and his father. Officer Reynolds, search these two for any additional weapons or restraints." The search revealed that both Derek and Marcus were carrying zip ties, pepper spray, and what looked like collapsible batons. They weren't licensed security guards. They weren't licensed anything. As Officer Reynolds later explained to me, Patricia had hired them through some sketchy online service, and they had been driving around the neighborhood for months pretending to be legitimate security personnel. Officer Martinez took detailed statements from both Jake and me. Jake described how he had been swimming in the pool by himself, had lost track of time, and when he climbed out, Derek and Marcus were standing there. They demanded to know his address and whether he was a resident. When Jake tried to leave to go home, they blocked his path and told him he was being detained for trespassing and pool violation. Jake said he tried to call me, but Derek grabbed his phone and threw it on the ground, which explained the cracked screen I had seen. When Jake protested and said they couldn't do that, Marcus grabbed one of his arms and Derek grabbed the other, and they held him there, telling him he was under arrest and that his parents would be fined and possibly evicted from the neighborhood for raising a delinquent child. Listening to my son recount this experience, hearing the fear in his voice as he described being held against his will by two grown men, made me want to put my fist through something. But I kept my composure and gave my own statement, describing exactly what I had witnessed when I arrived. Several neighbors also came forward to give statements. Margaret Chen said she had seen the whole thing from her kitchen window and had been about to call the police herself when she saw me arrive. Bob Whitmore, surprisingly, also corroborated our version of events, saying that Derek and Marcus had been getting increasingly aggressive in their patrol activities over the past few weeks, stopping people and demanding identification, threatening fines for minor violations. Derek and Marcus were placed in separate patrol cars, and Sergeant Holbrook informed them they were being arrested for kidnapping in the second degree, a Class 2 felony under Arizona Revised Statutes, Section 131310. He explained that unlawfully restraining another person with the intent to prevent their liberation constituted kidnapping, and the fact that the victim was a minor made it particularly serious. Patricia was furious. "This is going to be a nightmare for your family, Logan. The HOA board will hear about this. We'll take action. You do what you need to do, Patricia. But if you or anyone acting on behalf of this HOA comes near my son again, I'll file a restraining order so fast it'll make your head spin." I kept my voice level, but there was no mistaking the warning in my tone. Sergeant Holbrook turned to Patricia. "Madam, I strongly suggest you consult with your HOA's legal counsel before taking any action related to this incident. Your association hired individuals who committed a felony against a minor resident. That exposes the HOA to significant civil liability. If I were you, I'd be more concerned about that than revenge." Patricia opened her mouth to respond, then seemed to think better of it. She turned on her heel and stalked toward her silver Mercedes, her phone pressed to her ear. The police finished their investigation and told us we were free to go. Sergeant Holbrook gave me his card and said a detective would be in touch within the next few days to follow up. He also suggested I take Jake to the emergency room to have his shoulder examined and documented, and to take pictures of any bruising that developed. Will they actually face charges? I asked. Or is this going to get swept under the rug? This is a serious crime, Mr. Garrison, Sergeant Holbrook said. They physically restrained your minor child without legal authority and made threats about using chemical spray on him. The county attorney's office will absolutely prosecute this. Get your son checked out at the hospital and document everything. You'll probably want to consult with a civil attorney as well, because the HOA's insurance company is going to have some questions about why their insured organization hired unlicensed security guards who kidnapped a kid. Jake and I drove to Phoenix Children's Hospital, about 20 minutes from our subdivision. The emergency room wasn't too crowded for a Wednesday evening, and we were seen within an hour. The doctor examined Jake's shoulder and arm, noting some bruising starting to appear on his upper arm where Derek had gripped him. She took photographs for the medical record and said he would be sore for a few days, but there was no serious damage. Has he been evaluated for emotional trauma? The doctor asked me privately while Jake was getting dressed. Being physically restrained by adults can be very frightening for a child. Not yet. I'm going to call his therapist tomorrow and make an appointment. Jake had been seeing a counselor named Dr. Rebecca Sanchez since his mother died, and while his sessions had become less frequent over the past year, I knew he would need some support to process what had happened today. We got home around 11 that night. Jake was quiet, exhausted, and I could see he was processing everything. I made him a grilled cheese sandwich, his comfort food since he was little, and we sat at the kitchen table together. "Dad, am I in trouble with the HOA?" Jake asked, his voice small. "No, buddy. You're not in trouble with anyone. Those people had no right to touch you. What they did was illegal, and they're the ones facing consequences, not you. Patricia said I was trespassing and that we might get kicked out of our house." I felt a fresh wave of anger at Patricia for terrorizing my kid. "She can't kick us out of our house, Jake. We own it. The HOA can fine us for certain violations, but even then they have to follow specific procedures. And you weren't trespassing. You live here. You have every right to use the community pool. You just lost track of time. I'm sorry I was out after 8. I know the rules say the pool closes at 8. Jake, look at me." I waited until he met my eyes. "You made a small mistake. You lost track of time while swimming. That's something that might warrant a warning or at most a small fine. It absolutely does not justify grown men grabbing you and refusing to let you leave. What they did to you was wrong. What they did was a crime. Do you understand that?" He nodded slowly. "Officer Martinez said the same thing. Good. And if anyone from the HOA tries to approach you or talk to you about this, I want you to walk away and call me immediately. Don't talk to Patricia. Don't talk to any board members, and definitely don't talk to any security people if they somehow still have jobs after tonight." "Okay, Dad." We finished eating, and I sent Jake to bed. I knew he probably wouldn't sleep much, and I certainly wasn't going to. I spent the next 2 hours on my laptop, researching Arizona kidnapping laws and HOA liability. What I found was both reassuring and disturbing. Under Arizona law, kidnapping in the second degree occurred when someone knowingly restrained another person with intent to prevent their liberation. The fact that Derek and Marcus had physically held Jake and refused to let him leave, even when he was clearly distressed and asking to call his parent, absolutely met that definition. The penalties were severe, ranging from 4 to 10 years in prison depending on various factors. More interestingly, I discovered that HOAs could be held civilly liable for the actions of their agents, including security personnel. Patricia's claim that Derek and Marcus were acting under her authority might actually make things worse for the HOA, not better. If the association had hired these men without properly vetting their credentials or training them on the limits of their authority, the HOA could face massive liability. I sent an email to my friend Daniel Griffin, who was a civil attorney in Scottsdale, asking if he could recommend someone who specialized in HOA disputes and personal injury cases. Daniel responded within minutes, despite the late hour, with the name and number of an attorney named Lisa Brennan, who had a reputation for taking on problematic HOAs. I finally went to bed around 2 in the morning but barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jake's terrified face and heard his voice screaming for me. I kept thinking about what could have happened if I hadn't gotten there when I did. What if they had taken him somewhere? What if they had actually pepper sprayed him? The next morning, I called into work and explained I needed a few days off for a family emergency. My boss, thankfully, was understanding. I then called Dr. Sanchez's office and explained the situation to her receptionist. Dr. Sanchez called me back personally within an hour and said she had a cancellation that afternoon and could see Jake at 3. I also called Lisa Brennan's office and was able to get an appointment for the following day. Her paralegal explained that she would need copies of all the police reports, medical records, and any HOA documentation related to the incident. Jake seemed better in the morning light, though he was quiet and stayed close to me. I let him stay home from school, and we spent the morning just being together, watching movies and not talking about what had happened unless he brought it up. Around noon, my doorbell rang. I checked the security camera I had installed last year and saw a man in a suit standing on my porch holding a folder. I opened the door but kept the security screen locked between us. "Logan Garrison," the man asked. "Who's asking?" "My name is Richard Torres. I'm an attorney representing the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association. I'd like to speak with you about the incident yesterday evening. The incident where your client's security guards kidnapped my son." Richard had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I understand there was an unfortunate situation. The board would like to resolve this matter amicably without involving litigation. May I come in?" "No. If you want to communicate with me, you can do so through my attorney. I'll have her contact you." I started to close the door. "Mr. Garrison, please. The board is prepared to offer you a settlement. They're willing to waive all HOA fees for the next 5 years and pay for your son's medical expenses. All we ask is that you sign a release agreeing not to pursue civil action against the association." I stopped and stared at him through the screen door. "Your clients hired 2 unlicensed thugs who terrorized and physically assaulted my 14-year-old son. Those men are currently facing felony kidnapping charges, and you want me to sign away my rights for 5 years of HOA fees. The fees are $230 a month. You're offering me less than $14,000 to pretend this didn't happen. We can negotiate the terms," Richard said quickly. "What would you consider fair compensation?" "I don't know yet because I haven't tallied up all the damages. But I'll tell you this, even if I were inclined to settle, which I'm not at this moment, I wouldn't do it without thoroughly investigating how your client ended up hiring criminals to patrol our neighborhood. My attorney will contact you. Please leave my property." Richard placed a business card on the porch railing and left. I took a picture of the card and then brought it inside, adding it to the growing file of documents related to the case. That afternoon, Jake had his session with Dr. Sanchez. I sat in the waiting room for the full hour, scrolling through messages on my phone from neighbors who had heard about what happened. Most were supportive, but a few seemed to think I was overreacting. One message from a woman named Carol who lived 3 streets over actually said, "If your son had just followed the rules, none of this would have happened." I deleted that message without responding. When Jake emerged from his session, he looked tired but a little lighter. Dr. Sanchez asked to speak with me privately and said that Jake was processing the trauma appropriately, but that she wanted to see him twice a week for the next month to make sure he didn't develop any lasting anxiety or trust issues with authority figures. He mentioned that the men threatened to pepper spray him, Dr. Sanchez said. That's particularly concerning because it represents a threat of physical pain and injury. We'll need to work through that. Whatever he needs, I said. Cost isn't a concern. The next day, I met with Lisa Brennan at her office in Scottsdale. She was a sharp woman in her mid-40s with short gray hair and intense green eyes that seemed to miss nothing. I spent 90 minutes walking her through everything that had happened, providing copies of all the documentation I had gathered. "This is one of the more egregious cases I've seen," Lisa said when I finished, "and I've seen some bad ones." HOAs seem to attract a certain type of person who enjoys wielding petty power over their neighbors, but actually hiring fake security to physically detain residents, that crosses a line into criminal territory. "The HOA's attorney showed up at my house yesterday trying to get me to sign a settlement," I said, handing her Richard Torres's business card. Lisa's eyebrows went up. "That was incredibly stupid of them. That could be construed as attempting to obstruct justice or tamper with a witness in a criminal case." "Did you record the conversation?" "No, but I have a doorbell camera that captured the whole thing." "Get me that footage." "I'm going to make some calls and find out exactly what the HOA's insurance situation looks like. Based on what you've told me, they hired unlicensed security without doing any background checks or providing proper training. That's negligence at minimum, possibly gross negligence. The insurance company is going to be very unhappy." "What kind of settlement should I be thinking about?" I asked. "I don't want you thinking about settlement at all right now," Lisa said firmly. "Let's gather all the facts, see what the criminal case against these 2 men looks like, and build the strongest possible case. Then we'll think about numbers. But Logan, this isn't just about money. This is about making sure this HOA can never do something like this again. We need to send a message that you cannot terrorize residents and especially cannot terrorize children." I left her office feeling like I finally had someone on my side who understood the gravity of what had happened. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved quickly. The county attorney's office assigned a prosecutor named David Chen to the case against Derek Simmons and Marcus Webb. He called me and said the case was strong and that they would be seeking the maximum penalties given that the victim was a minor. Derek and Marcus had both been released on bond, but as conditions of their release, they were prohibited from entering the Saguaro Heights subdivision or having any contact with Jake or me. Their trial was scheduled for 3 months out. Meanwhile, Lisa Brennan went to work investigating the HOA. She filed requests for all HOA meeting minutes, financial records, and documentation related to the hiring of Derek and Marcus. What she discovered was worse than we had imagined. Patricia Dennison had hired Derek and Marcus without board approval. She had found them through a Craigslist ad offering security services. She hadn't checked their backgrounds, hadn't verified whether they had any training or licenses, and had been paying them out of HOA funds without proper documentation or approval. Derek had a criminal record that included assault, and Marcus had previously been fired from a legitimate security company for using excessive force. The HOA's insurance company, when they found out what had happened, immediately sent a letter denying coverage for any claims related to the incident, citing a policy exclusion for criminal acts. The HOA board, which consisted of 5 members including Patricia, held an emergency meeting and voted 4-1 to remove Patricia as president. The lone dissenting vote was Patricia herself, but the damage was done. Lisa filed a civil lawsuit against the HOA, Patricia Dennison personally, and Derek Simmons and Marcus Webb, seeking damages for assault, battery, false imprisonment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and negligence. She also sent demand letters to several individual board members, arguing they had failed in their fiduciary duty by not properly overseeing the HOA's finances and operations. The lawsuit became the talk of the neighborhood. A significant faction of residents was sympathetic to us and appalled by what had happened. But there was also a vocal minority who seemed to think we were being vindictive and trying to destroy the HOA. I received several angry letters in my mailbox, all anonymous, accusing me of suing my neighbors and trying to raise everyone's HOA fees. One evening, about 3 weeks after the incident, someone spray-painted "Traitor" across my garage door. I called the police, filed a report, and installed additional security cameras around my property. Jake saw the graffiti before I could clean it off, and it set back some of the progress he had made in therapy. Dr. Sanchez said Jake was developing anxiety about being home alone and had started having nightmares about being chased by men in dark uniforms. It broke my heart to see my kid, who had already been through so much with losing his mother, now dealing with this trauma. The preliminary hearing for Derek and Marcus took place 6 weeks after their arrest. Jake and I both had to testify. The courtroom was small, and I could see Derek and Marcus sitting at the defense table with their attorneys, both public defenders who looked overworked and underpaid. Jake was nervous, but he did well on the stand. The prosecutor, David Chen, asked him straightforward questions about what happened, and Jake answered clearly, describing how Derek and Marcus had grabbed him and refused to let him go. The defense attorneys tried to suggest that Jake had been combative or threatening, but Jake held firm, explaining that he had only tried to leave and call his father. When it was my turn to testify, I described exactly what I had witnessed when I arrived. The defense attorney for Derek tried to suggest that I had been the aggressor, that I had attacked his client without provocation. But the testimony from the other witnesses, including Margaret Chen and Bob Whitmore, contradicted that narrative. The judge, a stern woman named Judge Ellen Rosario, heard all the testimony and reviewed the evidence. At the end of the hearing, she ruled that there was sufficient probable cause to bind Derek and Marcus over for trial on the charges of kidnapping in the 2nd degree. She also denied their attorneys' motions to reduce the charges to unlawful imprisonment, saying that the evidence clearly showed they had intended to prevent Jake's liberation and had used physical force to do so. The trial date was set for 4 months later, in early August. As we left the courthouse, David Chen told us that he expected both defendants would eventually plead guilty rather than go to trial, especially given the strength of the evidence. He said the state would be willing to consider a plea agreement, but would not recommend anything less than significant prison time. The civil case moved forward on a parallel track. Lisa Brennan deposed Patricia Dennison, and I got to read the transcript later. Patricia had been defiant, insisting that she had acted within her authority as HOA president, and that Derek and Marcus had simply been doing their jobs. She claimed that Jake had been hostile and threatening, which was contradicted by literally every witness and all the physical evidence. Lisa also deposed the other HOA board members. Most of them threw Patricia under the bus, saying they had no idea she had hired security guards without proper approval or oversight. One board member, a man named Thomas Reeves, admitted that he had heard complaints about Derek and Marcus being too aggressive, but had assumed Patricia was handling it appropriately. The HOA itself was in financial turmoil. The insurance company's denial of coverage meant that the association had to hire its own defense attorneys using HOA funds, which were limited. Several residents filed a petition to dissolve the HOA entirely, though that was a complicated legal process that would take years if it happened at all. In late June, about 3 months after the incident, Lisa called me with news. Derek Simmons and Marcus Webb both accepted plea agreements. They're each pleading guilty to 1 count of kidnapping in the 2nd degree. Derek is getting 7 years in state prison. Marcus is getting 6 years. They'll both be required to register as offenders against children when they're released. I felt a grim satisfaction at the news. 7 years. Is that enough? It's actually a pretty stiff sentence for this type of crime. The prosecutor pushed hard, and the judge made it clear she wasn't going to be lenient given that the victim was a minor. How's Jake doing? He's getting better. Still having some nightmares, but Dr. Sanchez says he's making progress. How does this affect our civil case? It strengthens it significantly. Their guilty pleas are admissions that they committed the acts alleged. We can use that in our case. I'm going to push for mediation with the HOA. With the criminal convictions, I think we can get a substantial settlement, and then we can focus on Patricia individually. The mediation took place in July at a neutral location, a conference room in a downtown Phoenix office building. The HOA was represented by a new attorney, since Richard Torres had withdrawn from the case, claiming a conflict of interest. The new attorney was a woman named Sandra Mills, who seemed much more pragmatic than her predecessor. We spent 6 hours in that mediation. Lisa laid out our case in excruciating detail, including expert testimony she had lined up regarding Jake's psychological trauma, the negligence of the HOA in hiring unlicensed security, and the failure of the board to provide oversight. She had calculated our damages at just over $2 million, including punitive damages. The HOA's attorney argued that $2 million would bankrupt the association and force special assessments on all the homeowners. Lisa's response was blunt. That's what happens when an organization acts with gross negligence and allows the kidnapping of a child. The residents can be angry at Patricia Dennison and the board members who failed to supervise her, not at my client for seeking justice. After extensive back and forth, we reached a settlement. The HOA would pay $400,000, which was close to the limit of their available funds without imposing special assessments. Patricia Dennison would personally pay an additional $200,000, and she would resign from the board and agree never to serve in any HOA leadership position again. Finally, the HOA would implement new policies requiring background checks for any contractors, prohibiting the hiring of security personnel without proper licensing, and creating a resident complaint process with oversight. Lisa advised me to accept the settlement. We could probably get more if we went to trial, but it would take years, and there's no guarantee the HOA would have any money left by the time we got a judgment. $600,000 is substantial, and the policy changes ensure this won't happen again. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to push for more, to make them hurt the way Jake had been hurt. But another part of me just wanted this to be over. Jake needed stability and peace, not years of ongoing litigation. "I'll accept it on one condition," I told Lisa. "I want a written apology from Patricia Dennison. A real one, not some lawyer-drafted garbage. I want her to admit what she did was wrong and apologize to Jake personally." Lisa went back to the mediator with that demand. There was another hour of negotiation, but eventually, Patricia agreed. The settlement was finalized, and 2 weeks later, Patricia showed up at Dr. Sanchez's office, where we had arranged for her to deliver the apology in a controlled environment with the therapist present. Patricia looked like she had aged 10 years in the 4 months since the incident. Her hair was no longer perfectly styled and she wore minimal makeup. She sat across from Jake and me, with Dr. Sanchez positioned nearby, and pulled out a handwritten letter. "Jake Logan, I want to apologize for what happened to you," Patricia began, her voice shaking slightly. "I hired Derek Simmons and Marcus Webb without properly vetting them or training them. I gave them the impression that they had authority they did not actually have. I never intended for any resident, especially a child, to be hurt or frightened. But my poor decisions led directly to Jake being grabbed and held against his will, and for that, I am deeply sorry." She looked directly at Jake. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were just swimming in the pool a little late, and that never should have resulted in what happened to you. I hope someday you can forgive me, though I understand if you can't. I'm sorry." Jake looked at me, uncertain how to respond. I nodded slightly, giving him permission to say whatever he needed to say. "Okay," Jake said quietly. "Thank you for apologizing." Patricia looked like she wanted to say more, but Dr. Sanchez stepped in. "I think that's sufficient for today. Patricia, thank you for coming. Logan, Jake, do you have anything you want to say?" "I did, actually. Patricia, I believe you didn't intend for this to happen. But intent doesn't erase harm. Those men terrified my son. They physically hurt him. And your actions after the fact, trying to minimize what happened and blame Jake, made it worse. I hope you learn from this. I hope you understand that power, even the small amount of power that comes with being an HOA president, comes with responsibility. You failed in that responsibility and a kid paid the price." Patricia nodded, tears running down her face. "I know, I'm sorry." She left, and Jake and I stayed to talk with Dr. Sanchez for a while. Jake said the apology helped, but he still didn't feel safe in the neighborhood. That conversation led to a bigger decision that I had been avoiding. That evening, I sat down with Jake in our living room. "Buddy, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Do you want to stay living here, or do you want to move somewhere else?" Jake didn't hesitate. "I want to move. Every time I see the pool or drive past where it happened, I feel sick. And I hate that some of the neighbors are mad at us." "Okay, then we'll move. We'll find someplace without an HOA, someplace where you can just be a kid without worrying about rule-obsessed busybodies." "Really? You'd move because of me, Jake? You're the most important thing in my life. If you don't feel safe here, then we're not staying here. Besides, I never really liked the beige paint colors Patricia forced us to use anyway." Jake laughed, a real laugh, the first one I had heard from him in weeks. We started house hunting the next week. The settlement money would cover a down payment on a new place with plenty left over for Jake's college fund and ongoing therapy. We ended up finding a great house in Chandler, Arizona, an older neighborhood with mature trees and no homeowners association. The house needed some work, but it had character and a big backyard where Jake could hang out without anyone timing how long he stayed outside. We closed on the new house in September and moved in the first week of October. Jake started at a new school, and while there was an adjustment period, he made friends quickly. Dr. Sanchez continued to see him, and gradually, the nightmares became less frequent. Derek Simmons and Marcus Webb were formally sentenced in late September. I didn't attend the sentencing hearing, but David Chen called me afterward to let me know that both men had been remanded into custody and transported to Arizona State Prison to begin serving their sentences. Judge Rosario had given a lengthy statement at the sentencing about the serious nature of their crimes and the special vulnerability of child victims. She said that people who prey on children or abuse positions of authority deserve the full weight of the justice system, David told me. Both defendants tried to give statements saying they were sorry and didn't mean to hurt anyone, but the judge wasn't buying it. She noted that they had multiple opportunities to release Jake and chose not to. That showed intent and disregard for his well-being. The news brought some closure, though I knew Jake would carry the emotional scars for a long time. Dr. Sanchez said he was resilient, that he had faced tragedy before with his mother's death and had developed coping mechanisms. She was optimistic about his long-term recovery. As for Patricia Dennison, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband had also moved out of Saguaro Heights. Apparently, the social pressure and ongoing anger from residents who blamed her for the special assessment they eventually had to pay made life there untenable. I didn't wish her ill, but I didn't feel particularly sorry for her either. She had created this situation through arrogance and poor judgment. The Saguaro Heights HOA underwent major reforms. A new board was elected, and they hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations. They implemented all the policy changes required by our settlement agreement, and then some. I heard they even hosted a community meeting to discuss what had happened and how to prevent anything similar in the future. Some of the neighbors from Saguaro Heights reached out to me after we moved. Margaret Chen sent a lovely card welcoming us to our new home and saying she was sorry things had ended the way they did. Bob Whitmore, of all people, sent an email saying he had been wrong to ever support the aggressive security patrol and that he had voted for the new board members who promised accountability. Life slowly returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. Jake thrived at his new school and joined the swim team, which I saw as a positive sign that the pool incident hadn't destroyed his love of swimming. He made a close friend named Marcus, and initially I flinched every time Jake said that name, but gradually it became just a name again, not a trigger. I stayed in touch with Lisa Brennan, and she told me that our case had gotten significant attention in legal circles focused on HOA reform. Apparently, several state legislators had used it as an example in pushing for new laws to provide better oversight of homeowners associations and limit their authority. A bill was working its way through the Arizona legislature that would require all HOA board members to undergo training on the limits of their legal authority and would create a state-level complaint process for HOA abuses. Your case might actually change things for the better, Lisa told me during one of our final meetings to wrap up the paperwork. That's rare in civil litigation. Usually we just resolve the immediate problem and move on. But this has sparked a real conversation about HOA overreach and accountability. Good, I said. If something positive comes out of this nightmare, that helps, but I still wish it had never happened. Of course, how's Jake really doing? He's good. Better every day, he still sees Dr. Sanchez once a week, but they're talking about reducing it to monthly soon. He's sleeping better, his grades are excellent, and he seems happy. That's all I can ask for. Now, more than a year after the incident, life has fully moved on. Jake is 15 now, thriving in 10th grade and talking about wanting to learn to drive soon, which terrifies me in a completely normal parental way. The house in Chandler feels like home in a way Sagaro Heights never did. I've gotten to know our neighbors, and they're good people who respect boundaries and don't obsess over lawn height or paint colors. I still think about that evening sometimes. The terror I felt reading Jake's text message, the sight of him being held by those two men, the look of fear on his face. But mostly I think about how it ended, with justice served and real consequences for people who abused their authority and hurt a child. Derek Simmons and Marcus Webb are still in prison. They'll be there for several more years, and when they get out, they'll have to register as offenders against children and will face significant restrictions on where they can live and work. Patricia Dennison lost her home, her position, and her reputation. The HOA paid a heavy price financially and had to completely reform its operations. As for Jake and me, we survived. We came through it together, and if anything, we're closer now than we were before. He knows he can count on me to protect him, to fight for him, to never stop advocating for his safety and well-being. And I know he's strong enough to face adversity and come out the other side. The settlement money is sitting in investments, most of it earmarked for Jake's future. We used some of it for the new house, some for ongoing therapy, and some for a vacation to Hawaii last summer where Jake learned to surf, and we both learned to relax again. The rest will help pay for college and give Jake a financial cushion as he starts his adult life. People sometimes ask me if I regret moving to Sagaro Heights in the first place, if I wish we had stayed in our old house in Temp, despite the painful memories. I don't. We needed a fresh start after Jake's mother died, and Sagaro Heights gave us that, at least for a while. What happened there was traumatic and terrible, but it also taught us important lessons about standing up for ourselves, about not letting authority figures abuse their power, and about the importance of community accountability. The truth is, HOAs can serve useful purposes. They can maintain common areas, establish reasonable standards to preserve property values, and create a sense of community. But they can also become vehicles for petty tyranny when the wrong people get power, and when there aren't adequate checks and balances. What happened to Jake was an extreme example, but it grew out of a culture where Patricia Dennison believed she had unlimited authority and could do whatever she wanted in the name of enforcing the rules. I hope the reforms that came out of our case prevent other families from going through what we did. I hope other HOA boards see what happened and realize they need proper oversight, proper training, and proper humility about the limits of their authority. And I hope parents everywhere understand that they have every right to protect their children from abuse, even when it comes from people claiming to act with official sanction. Jake is calling me from the backyard, asking if I want to shoot some hoops before dinner. I close my laptop, where I've been reviewing some work documents, and head outside. The Arizona sun is setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and my son is grinning at me, spinning a basketball on his finger. This is what matters. This moment, this peace, this normal teenage kid doing normal teenage things without fear or trauma. Everything we went through, all the legal battles and stress and anger, it was worth it to get here. I take the ball from Jake and take a shot. It bounces off the rim and he laughs, grabbing the rebound. "You're rusty, old man." "Old man? I'm only 38, that's not old." "Ancient," Jake says, still grinning, and sinks a perfect three-pointer. We play until the sun fully sets and the automatic lights kick on, and then we head inside for dinner. Just a regular evening in a regular house in a regular neighborhood. No security guards, no HOA drama, no one trying to enforce ridiculous rules with criminal consequences. Just a father and son together, safe, and finally at peace. That's the happy ending we fought for, and that's the happy ending we got.